Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. The most dangerous talent in a company is not the one everyone notices, it's the one nobody knows exists. The elevator doors slid open on the 52nd floor of Whitmore Global, and Evelyn Hart stepped out with the same quiet expression she had worn almost every weekday for the last 3 years. Around her, employees hurried through the sleek Manhattan headquarters carrying laptops, coffee cups, and urgent conversations. Nobody looked twice at her. Nobody ever did. That was exactly how she wanted it. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown reflected the pale morning sunlight across polished marble floors. To most people, this building represented ambition, success, power. To Evelyn, it was simply a place where she could disappear. She walked toward her small workstation near the executive conference wing, set down her tote bag, and carefully removed a navy blue notebook worn smoothly at the edges. Before turning on her computer, she opened it to a blank page and wrote a single sentence in Hungarian. Beneath it, she translated the sentence into Japanese, then Arabic, then Italian. Her pen moved effortlessly. A few seconds later, the notebook was closed again and tucked into a drawer before anyone could notice. "Morning, Evelyn," called a marketing associate passing by. "Morning. Could you send me those scheduling reports?" "Already in your inbox." "You're a lifesaver." He smiled and kept walking. He never asked how she always finished tasks before anyone requested them. Nobody asked many questions about Evelyn Hart. In a company filled with executives eager to impress one another, being forgettable was almost a superpower. At 10 o'clock, she delivered meeting packets to Conference Room B. At 11, she coordinated travel schedules for 3 vice presidents. At noon, she ate a turkey sandwich alone in a quiet corner of the employee cafe while reading an article written entirely in Portuguese. When footsteps approached, she immediately switched the screen to a spreadsheet. The habit was automatic now. Hidden. Safe. Across the room, conversations buzzed around promotions, bonuses, and corporate politics. Evelyn stayed invisible. Yet every now and then she caught fragments of conversations in languages few others understood. A group of investors speaking French near the elevators. A vendor arguing in German over speakerphone. 2 visitors chatting rapidly in Mandarin while waiting in reception. She understood every word. She never reacted. 3 years earlier, she might have joined the conversation. 3 years earlier, she might have introduced herself differently. But that version of Evelyn belonged to another life. Back then, professors had called her extraordinary. Recruiters had competed for her attention. Doors opened the moment she entered a room. Then life had taught her a lesson she never forgot. Talent attracted attention. Attention attracted expectations. Expectations attracted disappointment. Quiet was easier. Quiet was safer. Her phone vibrated softly on the desk. A calendar notification reminded her of tomorrow's board meeting. Another high-level international negotiation. Another day arranging schedules while powerful people made decisions. Evelyn clicked the reminder away and continued typing. Through the glass walls of the executive corridor, she caught a brief glimpse of Graham Whitmore emerging from a private meeting. Even from a distance, he commanded attention. Tall, controlled, impossibly composed. The billionaire founder moved through the hallway while executives immediately straightened their posture around him. Graham rarely smiled, rarely slowed down, rarely noticed people outside his inner circle. As he passed Evelyn's workstation, his attention remained fixed on a tablet in his hand. He walked by without looking up. Evelyn barely noticed. After all, the CEO didn't know her name. Why would he? To him, she was one more administrative employee among thousands. Yet as she watched him disappear around the corner, she had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, everything about her carefully hidden life would begin to unravel. The notebook remained tucked safely inside her drawer. The 8 languages remained locked behind polite smiles and routine emails. And the woman nobody noticed remained exactly where she wanted to be, silent, invisible, and completely underestimated. That evening, long after most of the office lights had gone dark, Evelyn remained at her desk finishing a stack of travel requests nobody else wanted to handle. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls, thousands of lights scattered across Manhattan like stars trapped between steel and concrete. She glanced at the clock. 7:43. Another ordinary day completed. Another day successfully forgotten. She closed the final spreadsheet and leaned back in her chair. The silence felt comforting. During quiet moments like these, she could almost pretend she was invisible. Almost. Her eyes drifted toward the drawer containing the Navy notebook. After a brief hesitation, she opened it again. The pages held years of notes, phrases, translations, and observations collected from every corner of the world. Most people filled journals with memories. Evelyn filled hers with languages, tiny pieces of cultures she never wanted to lose. She flipped through pages covered with Korean expressions, Russian grammar notes, Arabic poetry, and handwritten translations of old Italian sayings. One phrase caught her attention. Talent hidden for too long becomes a prison. She stared at the sentence for several seconds before quietly closing the notebook. 3 years ago, she would have laughed at the idea. Back then, she had believed talent opened doors. The memory arrived unexpectedly. Oxford University. A rainy afternoon. A lecture hall packed with students listening as she switched effortlessly between French, Mandarin, Russian, and Spanish during an international language symposium. She had been 24 years old and convinced her future would be extraordinary. Professors praised her. Recruiters pursued her. Organizations offered opportunities she once thought existed only in movies. Then everything changed. Her father had always been the person who encouraged her the most. He used to tell her that language was more than communication. It was understanding, connection, trust. But after his passing, life became a blur of responsibilities, legal paperwork, and painful realizations. People who once celebrated her success suddenly became interested in what her abilities could do for them. Every conversation seemed to come with expectations attached. Every opportunity carried invisible strings. Eventually, she became exhausted. Not from working hard, from constantly performing, constantly proving herself, constantly being the smartest person in the room. So she disappeared. Not physically, professionally. She accepted an administrative position at Whitmore Global and never corrected anyone's assumptions. If coworkers believed she was ordinary, she allowed it. If managers overlooked her, she accepted it. If people underestimated her, even better. The freedom was addictive. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. A message from her mother appeared on the screen. "Dinner this weekend? I miss you." Evelyn smiled softly. "Absolutely. Saturday afternoon?" A reply arrived almost immediately. "Perfect. Do not work too hard." The familiar warmth settled over her. Family had become smaller over the years, but also more important. She slipped her phone into her bag and stood to leave. As she crossed the nearly empty office floor, movement inside a nearby conference room caught her attention. Through the glass walls, she saw Graham Whitmore seated alone at the far end of a massive table. No executives, no assistants, no audience. Just the billionaire CEO studying documents under the glow of a single lamp. For the first time, he looked less like a corporate legend and more like an ordinary man carrying too much responsibility. Evelyn quickly looked away and continued walking. Their worlds had nothing in common. By tomorrow morning, everything would return to normal. She would answer emails, schedule meetings, blend into the background. Nobody would notice her. Nobody would know her secrets. Yet upstairs, plans were already unfolding for the largest international deal Whitmore Global had attempted in years. Representatives from 6 countries would arrive before noon. Translation systems had been arranged. Interpreters had been scheduled. Every detail appeared perfectly organized. What nobody realized was that one small mistake hidden deep inside tomorrow's preparations was about to place Evelyn Hart directly in the center of a room she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. The next morning arrived wrapped in the sharp energy that always seemed to accompany important decisions. By 8 o'clock, Whitmore Global felt different. Security personnel moved with greater urgency. Executive assistants hurried through hallways carrying folders and tablets. Luxury vehicles lined the curb outside the Manhattan Tower as international delegates arrived one after another. Evelyn stepped out of the elevator carrying a stack of briefing materials and immediately sensed the tension in the air. Today was not an ordinary business meeting. The agreement being negotiated could expand Whitmore Global into several new international markets. Billions of dollars depended on what happened inside conference room A. She placed the briefing packets in their assigned seats and quietly checked the schedule one final time. Everything appeared perfect. Every delegate had an interpreter assigned. Every presentation had been translated. Every technical detail had been reviewed. Yet something about the morning felt unsettled. At 9:15, the first problem appeared. A message flashed across her screen. Lead Russian interpreter delayed due to emergency travel disruption. Replacement pending. Evelyn stared at the notification for a second before closing it. It was unfortunate, but not catastrophic. Large corporations solve problems like this every day. By 10 o'clock, however, another message appeared. Backup interpreter unavailable. Virtual translation services activated. She frowned slightly. Virtual services were usually reliable, but international negotiations rarely followed a script. Cultural nuance mattered. Tone mattered. Context mattered. Machines often missed those things. Still, it was not her concern. She was an administrative assistant. Her job was to support the meeting, not participate in it. At 10:30, executives began filling the conference room. The atmosphere grew increasingly formal. Expensive suits. Confident. Smiles. Polished introductions. Through the glass walls, Evelyn watched Graham Whitmore greet each delegate personally. As always, he appeared completely in control. Nothing in his expression suggested concern. Nothing revealed the immense pressure resting on his shoulders. The meeting began precisely at 11. For the first hour, everything moved smoothly. Presentations flowed from one speaker to the next. Financial projections appeared on giant screens. Translators relayed information through wireless headsets. Evelyn remained outside the room managing schedules and answering logistical requests. Then, shortly after noon, voices inside the conference room suddenly grew louder. She looked up from her computer. Several executives were speaking at once. A technician hurried toward the translation control station. Moments later, another technician followed. Something was wrong. The conference room doors opened, and one of the project managers stepped into the hallway, visibly stressed. The translation platform crashed, he muttered to a colleague. Completely offline. Evelyn felt a small knot form in her stomach. Through the glass walls, she saw confusion spreading around the table. Headsets were being removed. Delegates exchanged uncertain glances. The technicians worked frantically, but nothing seemed to respond. 5 minutes later, the discussion resumed in English. Then something unexpected happened. One of the visiting representatives from Eastern Europe leaned forward and began speaking rapidly in Russian. Several members of his delegation nodded. The pace increased. The tone sharpened. Nobody on the Whitmore team responded. Graham listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When the representative finished speaking, silence settled over the room. The technicians stared helplessly at their screens. Executives exchanged nervous looks. Nobody understood what had just been said. Another burst of Russian followed, even faster than before. This time, frustration was obvious in the speaker's voice. The room grew uncomfortably still. Graham remained composed, but Evelyn noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. It was the first crack she had ever seen in his calm exterior. Seconds passed, then a full minute. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The negotiation that had taken months to arrange was beginning to unravel. Standing alone near the conference room entrance, Evelyn lowered her eyes. She knew exactly what the representative had said. Every word, every implication, every misunderstanding that was rapidly pushing the deal toward disaster. For 3 years, she had remained invisible. For 3 years, she had chosen silence. But as another tense exchange echoed through the room, she realized silence might no longer be an option. For a moment, Evelyn remained frozen near the conference room entrance. Her pulse quickened as another exchange unfolded in Russian. She understood every sentence. The visiting delegation was not rejecting the proposal. They believed Whitmore Global had intentionally withheld information about future distribution rights. A misunderstanding. A costly one. The kind that could destroy months of negotiations. One executive attempted to respond in English, but the visitors only looked more frustrated. The translation platform remained offline. The room was slipping further into confusion. Evelyn lowered her gaze. This was exactly the situation she had spent 3 years avoiding. The spotlight, the attention, the questions that would follow. Yet as she watched the discussion unravel, another thought surfaced. If she stayed silent now, everyone in that room would pay the price for a problem she could solve in seconds. Before she could change her mind, she stepped through the open conference room door. Nobody noticed her at first. Why would they? She was only the administrative assistant who delivered schedules and organized calendars. Graham Whitmore was listening to one of the delegates when a calm voice suddenly broke through the tension. "Excuse me," Evelyn said softly. Every head turned toward her. She immediately felt 20 pairs of eyes settle on her. One executive looked confused. Another appeared annoyed by the interruption. Graham studied her briefly, clearly trying to place her name. Evelyn swallowed and looked directly at the Russian delegation. Then she spoke. Perfect Russian flowed effortlessly from her lips. The room fell silent. It was not simply that she knew the language. It was the ease, the precision, the natural rhythm. The visiting delegates stared in visible surprise. One of them blinked twice as though he had misheard her. Evelyn calmly explained that Whitmore Global had never intended to restrict future distribution rights and clarified the specific section causing confusion. The lead representative listened carefully. Then he responded in rapid Russian. Without hesitation, Evelyn translated his concern into English. She answered his follow-up question. Then another. Then another. The conversation immediately began moving forward again. Around the table, executives exchanged astonished looks. Graham leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. For the first time since she had entered the room 3 years earlier, he was truly paying attention. The Russian representative suddenly switched topics and referenced a technical clause buried deep within the contract. Evelyn responded instantly. Another delegate joined the discussion in German. She answered him too. Several people visibly straightened in their chairs. The German response transitioned into a question involving European logistics regulations. Evelyn clarified the details without consulting a single document. Then a French delegate spoke. She replied in fluent French. A quiet murmur spread through the room. One executive actually removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Another looked toward the translation technicians as if searching for hidden equipment. There was none. It was all Evelyn. The woman nobody noticed. The woman nobody remembered inviting into the discussion. 40 minutes later, the atmosphere inside the conference room had completely changed. Conversations flowed smoothly. Questions were resolved quickly. The delegates who had seemed frustrated earlier were now smiling. Several even addressed Evelyn directly rather than the executives leading the presentation. Graham said very little. He simply observed. Every answer she provided created another question in his mind. Who was she? How long had she been working here? And how had someone with abilities like this remained hidden inside his company for 3 years? When the meeting finally adjourned for lunch, the international representatives stood and thanked Evelyn personally. One shook her hand. Another complimented her Russian. A third asked where she had studied languages. Evelyn offered polite answers and nothing more. Then, before anyone could stop her, she quietly gathered a stack of empty water glasses and carried them toward the service station as if nothing unusual had happened. The room remained silent after she left. Graham looked toward the doorway where she had disappeared. Then he turned to his chief operating officer. "Get me Evelyn Hart's personnel file," he said. Immediately. While the international delegates enjoyed lunch in the executive dining suite, Graham Whitmore sat alone in his office staring at a personnel file that made absolutely no sense. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass behind him, but for once he was not looking at quarterly forecasts or acquisition reports. His attention remained fixed on a single employee record. Evelyn Hart. Administrative assistant. Employment duration, 3 years. Performance reviews, excellent. Department transfers requested, none. Promotions requested, none. The information seemed ordinary until he reached the education section. Then he read it again. And again. Oxford University. Advanced Studies in Linguistics and International Communication. Academic distinctions. International fellowships. Professional certifications. Published research contributions. Graham slowly leaned back in his chair. The woman who spent her mornings coordinating calendars possessed credentials that exceeded those of several executives working 20 feet from his office. He opened the supplemental records. The surprises continued. French, German, Russian, Mandarin, Italian, Japanese, Arabic, Spanish. Verified proficiency, not conversational. Professional level. His chief operating officer entered carrying a tablet. "You wanted additional background?" Graham nodded. "Tell me this file is wrong." The man glanced down. "It is not." "Then why is she scheduling conference calls instead of leading?" International operations? The executive hesitated. Apparently nobody ever asked. Graham looked up sharply. Nobody. Her managers assumed she preferred administrative work. She never corrected them. Silence settled over the room. For years, Graham had built his company around one principle. Talent should never be wasted. Yet somehow one of the most qualified people in the building had remained invisible beneath layers of assumptions. What else do we know? Graham asked. Very little. She keeps to herself. No office politics. No complaints. No promotion requests. Consistently high evaluations. And nobody thought that was unusual? The executive offered a helpless shrug. After he left, Graham remained seated, studying the file once more. Something about the situation bothered him beyond the obvious business implications. Most ambitious professionals spent years fighting for opportunities. Evelyn seemed to be doing the opposite. She was hiding from them. Meanwhile, across the building, Evelyn sat alone in a small break room finishing a cup of coffee. Her hands remained steady, but her thoughts were anything but calm. She knew what was happening. By now somebody had pulled her records. Somebody had started asking questions. 3 years of carefully maintained anonymity had disappeared in less than an hour. A coworker entered the room carrying a salad container. Evelyn, she exclaimed. Everyone is talking about you. Evelyn forced a small smile. That cannot be good. Good? It is incredible. Did you really speak all those languages? Some of them. Some of them? The woman laughed. People are saying there are 8. Evelyn looked down at her coffee. People exaggerate. The coworker stared at her. You know, I have worked next to you for 2 years. I thought your biggest skill was organizing spreadsheets. For the first time all day, Evelyn laughed quietly. Most days it is. Yet beneath the humor, uneasiness lingered. Attention had a way of changing things. Expectations followed attention. They always did. An hour later, as she returned to her workstation, she found a message waiting in her inbox. Sender, Graham Whitmore. Subject, meeting request. Her stomach tightened immediately. The message contained only one sentence. Please stop by my office at 3 o'clock this afternoon. No explanation. No agenda. No additional details. Evelyn stared at the screen for several seconds. Around her, employees continued their conversations and meetings as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Somewhere between the broken translation system and the Russian conversation that followed, the invisible life she had built for herself had begun slipping away. At exactly 3 o'clock, she stood outside the office of the billionaire CEO, looking through the glass doors at the man waiting inside. And for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn Hart had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. Evelyn took a slow breath before knocking lightly on the glass door. Come in, Graham's voice called. She stepped inside. The office was larger than most apartments in Manhattan, yet surprisingly simple. No excessive decorations. No displays of wealth. Just floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive desk, and shelves filled with books. Graham stood near the window, overlooking the city. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then he turned and gestured toward a chair. Please sit. Evelyn sat carefully, keeping her posture composed. Graham returned to his desk, picked up her personnel file, and looked directly at her. You have worked here for 3 years. Yes. You speak 8 languages. Yes. You graduated from Oxford. Yes. Graham studied her expression. And somehow you ended up scheduling conference calls. A faint smile touched Evelyn's lips. Apparently, for the first time, Graham almost smiled back. Almost. Do you realize how unusual this situation is? I imagine it looks unusual from your perspective. From any perspective. He opened the file again. International certifications. Research publications. Advanced linguistic training. Evelyn, half the people negotiating contracts for this company do not have credentials like yours. She remained silent. Graham leaned forward. Why hide it? There it was. The question she had known would eventually come. The question she had spent years avoiding. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the skyline before answering. Because I wanted a quiet life. Graham blinked. That is all. Not all. But it is the simplest explanation. Silence settled between them. Graham had spent his entire career chasing opportunities. Building opportunities. Creating opportunities. The idea of someone intentionally avoiding them was completely foreign. Most people would have used those qualifications to climb as high as possible. Most people are different from me. Graham folded his hands together. You understand that after today, Remaining invisible is probably not an option. Evelyn nodded. I suspected that. He stood and walked toward the window. Below them, traffic moved through Manhattan in steady streams. Millions of people chasing goals, fighting for advancement, competing for attention. Yet the most remarkable employee in his company had spent years hiding in plain sight. I am going to make you an offer, he said finally. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. I thought you might. Graham turned toward her. Director of Global Communications. Immediate promotion. Significant salary increase. Executive authority on international negotiations. The position reports directly to me. Most employees would have accepted before he finished speaking. Some would have celebrated. Others might have cried. Evelyn simply sat quietly. Graham waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Then she spoke. No. The word landed in the room with unexpected force. Graham stared at her. No. No. For perhaps the first time in years, the billionaire CEO looked genuinely surprised. You are declining? Yes. Do you need more time? No. More information? No. Graham actually laughed once, a short disbelieving sound. Do you realize how many people would do almost anything for this opportunity? I do. And yet you are refusing it. I am. Graham walked back to his desk, unable to hide his curiosity. Every answer only deepened the mystery. Why? Evelyn looked down briefly before meeting his eyes. Because titles are not always what people think they are. Graham studied her carefully. Most people who entered this office spent their energy trying to become more important. Evelyn seemed to spend hers trying to remain free. For reasons he could not explain, he found that far more impressive. Meaning, sometimes a promotion gives you more responsibility. Sometimes it gives everyone else permission to own your life. Graham remained silent. Something in her voice suggested experience rather than theory. Someone disappointed you. It was not a question. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Several people did. The room grew quiet again. Outside the windows, afternoon sunlight reflected off neighboring skyscrapers. Inside, two people from completely different worlds sat across from one another, each trying to understand the other. Finally, Graham spoke. You know, Evelyn, most people leave my office asking for more. I am not most people. A smile appeared despite his efforts to suppress it. No, you definitely are not. As she stood to leave, Graham watched her carefully. He had intended to offer a promotion and solve a staffing problem. Instead, he had discovered something far more intriguing. A woman who possessed extraordinary talent, yet seemed determined to avoid power, recognition, and status. And for reasons he could not explain, he suddenly wanted to know her story. The days that followed should have returned to normal, but they did not. Something had shifted inside Whitmore Global. Employees who once walked past Evelyn without noticing now greeted her by name. Managers suddenly requested her opinion during meetings. Invitations appeared in her inbox from departments that had never spoken to her before. The attention was polite, even flattering, but it felt strangely uncomfortable. For 3 years, she had built a quiet corner of the world where expectations could not reach her. Now that corner was disappearing. Meanwhile, Graham found himself paying attention to details he had previously overlooked. During meetings, he noticed how quickly Evelyn processed information. During presentations, he noticed how often she predicted problems before anyone else recognized them. Even when she was not speaking, she seemed to understand the room better than most executives. One evening, nearly a week after their conversation, Graham left a strategy meeting later than expected. As he passed through an empty corridor, he noticed a light still glowing from a small conference room. Curious, he glanced through the glass. Evelyn sat alone at the table. In front of her rested the familiar Navy notebook. She appeared unaware that anyone was watching. Page after page was covered with handwritten notes in different languages. But what caught Graham's attention was not the writing. It was the expression on her face. For the first time, she looked completely at peace. No guarded answers. No carefully constructed distance. Just quiet concentration. Graham hesitated before knocking lightly on the glass. Evelyn looked up, visibly surprised. She quickly closed the notebook. Sorry, Graham said. I did not mean to interrupt. You are not interrupting. Working late. Graham noticed a cup of coffee beside her notebook. Cold. Untouched. You forgot to drink it. Evelyn glanced at the cup and laughed softly. Again. Without thinking, Graham walked to the break station outside and returned a few minutes later with a fresh one. Try not to work yourself into becoming a cautionary tale. Evelyn smiled. That sounds suspiciously like concern. Do not let it go to your head. Reading mostly. He stepped into the room. May I ask you something? Evelyn nodded cautiously. Why languages? The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, she studied the notebook before answering. Because they help me understand people. Graham sat across from her. Most people learn languages for travel or business. My father used to say, every language teaches you a different way to see the world. The mention of her father softened her voice. Graham noticed immediately. He sounds wise. A small smile appeared. Graham found himself wishing he had met the man. Anyone capable of shaping someone like Evelyn must have been extraordinary. He was. For the first time, she offered more than a short answer. When I was young, he would bring home books from used bookstores. French novels, Italian poetry, Spanish newspapers. We could not always afford much, but he always found room for books. Graham listened quietly. He believed understanding people mattered more than impressing them. Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the city lights outside. After he passed away, I spent a long time trying to prove he was right. And were you? She laughed softly. Not exactly. The honesty surprised both of them. Graham leaned back slightly. What happened? For several seconds, Evelyn remained silent. Then she answered. Success happened. Graham frowned. She continued. The more successful I became, the more people seemed interested in what I could do for them. Opportunities stopped feeling like opportunities. Everything became a transaction. Graham understood more than she realized. Wealth often created similar problems. So you walked away. I walked somewhere quieter. The room grew still. Outside, Manhattan glittered beneath the evening sky. Inside, two people sat sharing truths neither usually revealed. Graham found himself seeing her differently now. Not as a mysterious employee. Not as an extraordinary resume hidden in an administrative role. But as someone who had deliberately chosen peace over recognition. Someone who valued freedom more than status. As Evelyn gathered her notebook to leave, a folded paper slipped from between the pages and landed on the table. Graham glanced down. It was an old photograph. A younger Evelyn stood beside a smiling man holding a stack of books. Her father. She quickly picked it up, but not before Graham noticed the resemblance. The same thoughtful eyes. The same quiet kindness. He would have been proud of you, Graham said gently. Evelyn froze for a moment. Then she looked away. Maybe. Yet as she walked toward the door, she carried those words with her. And for the first time in many years, she found herself wondering if perhaps hiding was no longer the only way to protect what mattered most. 3 months later, the grand ballroom of the International Commerce Forum buzzed with conversations from every corner of the world. Delegations from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and South America filled the enormous venue overlooking the Hudson River. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors while translators worked inside. Glass booths lining the back wall. It was the largest international event Whitmore Global had ever hosted. Graham stood near the main stage reviewing final notes when a senior coordinator approached him, visibly concerned. We have a problem. Graham looked up immediately. What kind of problem? Several of the contracted translation teams are stuck at another event across town. Weather delays. Transportation issues. Half of them may not arrive in time. Graham glanced toward the growing crowd. Hundreds of guests were already taking their seats. Representatives from more than a dozen countries were preparing for negotiations scheduled months in advance. How long? He asked. Nobody knows. Before he could respond, another complication emerged. A disagreement broke out between two international delegations regarding a proposed partnership announcement. Different translations of the same document had created conflicting interpretations. Voices remained professional, but tension spread quickly through the room. Staff members exchanged nervous looks. Journalists noticed. Investors noticed. Within minutes, what was supposed to be a celebration threatened to become an embarrassment. Graham felt a familiar sense of pressure settle across his shoulders. Then he noticed someone standing quietly near the edge of the ballroom. Evelyn. She had attended only as an observer. No title. No official authority. Just another employee among hundreds. Yet the moment their eyes met, Graham knew exactly what he was thinking. He crossed the room. I need your help. Evelyn glanced toward the growing crowd. The translators? Among other things. She hesitated. For years, she would have stepped backward. For years, she would have searched for a way to disappear. But those years felt increasingly distant now. "All right," she said. Backstage, Evelyn adjusted the microphone with slightly trembling hands. "You look nervous," Graham said. "I am." "Good." She frowned. "Good. It means you still care." Evelyn laughed despite herself. Somehow, the tension eased immediately. Minutes later, she stepped onto the stage. Most attendees had never seen her before. The room slowly quieted. Graham introduced her simply. "Someone whose expertise has become invaluable to this company." Then he stepped aside. Evelyn looked out at hundreds of faces. A younger version of herself might have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm. She began in English, welcoming the delegates. Then she shifted seamlessly into French. Several representatives smiled in surprise. She transitioned into German, clarifying the disputed language within the partnership agreement. The tension immediately softened. Then came Spanish, Italian, Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, Arabic. Each transition felt effortless. Each explanation untangled another misunderstanding. Throughout the ballroom, conversations stopped. People who had been checking phones now listened carefully. Journalists lowered their cameras. Executives exchanged stunned glances. The woman standing on stage was not simply translating words. She was connecting people, building trust, creating understanding, exactly as her father had once described. Nearly an hour later, the event was running smoothly again. Agreements moved forward. Delegates shook hands. Applause erupted as the final presentation concluded successfully. Yet the loudest applause arrived when Evelyn stepped away from the podium. Hundreds of people rose to their feet. Through the crowd, she instinctively searched for one face. Not the investors, not the journalists, not the executives. Graham. When she found him standing and applauding, something inside her settled. Evelyn froze in surprise. She had spent years avoiding recognition. Now recognition surrounded her from every direction. Through the crowd, she found Graham watching from the front row. He was not applauding because of the languages, not because she had saved the event. He was applauding because she had finally allowed the world to see who she really was. As the audience slowly returned to their seats, Evelyn felt something unexpected settle inside her. Not pride, not triumph, relief. For the first time in years, she was no longer hiding. And for the first time in years, that felt completely safe. As the crowd continued celebrating around her, Evelyn glanced toward Graham one more time. He smiled. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Yet somehow that simple smile felt more meaningful than all the applause in the room. 1 year later, very little about Evelyn Hart's life looked the same. Yet somehow she felt more like herself than ever before. The small workstation near the executive corridor was gone. In its place stood an office overlooking the city she had spent years observing from the background. Her title now read Director of Global Communications, though she still laughed whenever people used it too formally. The biggest change was not the office, the title, or the international recognition that followed the forum. It was the quiet confidence she carried each day. She no longer felt the need to hide. Across Whitmore Global, employees often repeated a story about the assistant who turned out to be one of the most talented people in the company. Yet what inspired them was not her talent. It was her humility. Evelyn still remembered birthdays, still helped interns, still answered questions nobody else had time for. Success had changed her circumstances, but not her character. On a cool spring evening, the company hosted its annual leadership gala inside a renovated historic building overlooking the Hudson River. Soft music drifted through the ballroom as executives, partners, and employees celebrated another record-breaking year. Near the entrance stood a glass display that attracted almost as much attention as the event itself. Inside the display rested a simple navy notebook. The same notebook Evelyn had carried for years. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Never underestimate the quietest person in the room." Guests stopped to read it throughout the evening. Some smiled. Others nodded thoughtfully. Evelyn had protested when Graham first suggested displaying it. He insisted. "It belongs here," he told her. "It reminds people what really matters." As the evening continued, Evelyn found herself standing near the balcony overlooking the river. The city lights reflected across the water in shimmering patterns. Behind her, laughter and conversation filled the ballroom. For a moment, she simply enjoyed the view. "I was wondering where you disappeared." Too. She turned and smiled. Graham stepped onto the balcony carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to her. Escaping your own event? She asked. Learning from the best. They shared a laugh. The comfortable silence that followed felt natural now. Over the past year, friendship had grown into trust. Trust had grown into something deeper. Neither of them had rushed it. Neither wanted to. Some things deserve patience. Graham leaned against the railing and looked toward the skyline. Do you remember the first time you walked into my office? Evelyn groaned playfully. I was hoping you forgot that conversation. Not a chance. Because I rejected your promotion? Because you were the first person who ever did. She laughed again. Then his expression softened. Actually, that is not what I remember most. Evelyn looked at him curiously. Graham reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. For a moment, she simply stared. The sounds from the ballroom seemed to fade into the background. Graham. He opened the box. Inside rested an elegant ring. Simple. Timeless. Exactly the kind of choice he knew she would appreciate. The day you spoke Russian in that conference room was not the day I fell in love with you, he said quietly. Evelyn felt her eyes begin to shine. No. He shook his head. It was the day you turned down everything I thought people wanted. The title, the money, the status. You reminded me that success means very little if it costs you who you are. For a second, neither spoke. Then Evelyn smiled through happy tears. That might be the most honest thing you have ever said. I have learned from an excellent teacher. He took a slow breath. Evelyn Hart, will you marry me? The answer arrived before the question fully settled between them. Yes. Laughter mixed with tears as Graham slipped the ring onto her finger. Inside the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted. They turned and discovered dozens of smiling faces watching through the glass doors. Apparently, neither of them had been as private as they imagined. Later that evening, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and people who genuinely cared about them, Evelyn glanced toward the display case holding the old Navy notebook. For years that notebook had been a place to hide pieces of herself from the world. Now it represented something completely different. A reminder that gifts are not meant to stay hidden forever. Sometimes the right people help you find the courage to be seen. And as she stood beside the man she loved, looking out across the city lights, Evelyn finally understood something her father had known all along. The greatest opportunities are not the ones that make you important. They are the ones that allow you to become fully yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.